745,652 Americans were homeless on one night. That is not a city. That is a country. Some slept in shelters. Some slept in cars. Some slept under highways beside train tracks, in tents, motel rooms, transit stations, hospital waiting areas, and places no official count can fully see. In the West, the crisis can look like heat. On the coast, it can look like encampment sweeps. In the South, it can hide inside cars in weekly motels. But in Minneapolis, homelessness has another enemy: cold. The city can report progress. The count can go down. The sidewalk can be covered by snow before morning. But a lower number does not warm a bus stop. It does not dry a blanket. It does not keep a man alive when his socks are wet and the shelter door is already closed. Tonight we start with America's homelessness crisis. Then we follow it into Minneapolis, to a winter night, to a plastic bag holding one dry pair of socks, and to a man named Marcus trying to survive a city that says the numbers are getting better. On the surface, Minneapolis looks like a city built to survive winter. The Stone Arch Bridge over the Mississippi River, downtown skyways above the streets, U.S. Bank Stadium glowing in the cold, rail trains cutting through snow, and warm windows stacked above frozen sidewalks. But behind that order, another Minneapolis waits. Before sunrise, bus stops, underpasses, small encampments, wet blankets, and people counting the minutes until something opens. That is where this story begins. Not with a speech, not with a policy memo, not with a headline about progress. It begins with a man named Marcus. Marcus is 58, a composite character drawn from public data, local reporting, outreach patterns, winter shelter realities, and the lived experience of people surviving outside in cold weather cities. He is not one real person. For years, Marcus worked jobs that kept other buildings running: warehouse shifts, janitorial work, snow removal when his body could still take it. Then came a medical problem. Then missed rent. Then the kind of late fee that becomes another late fee. Then a room he could not keep. Now Marcus moves through Minneapolis differently than most people do. He does not see the city as neighborhoods first. He sees it as temperature. Where is warm? Where is closed? Where can he sit without being told to leave? Where can he dry his socks? Where can he keep his bag safe? Inside that bag is almost nothing that would look valuable to someone else. But to Marcus, one item matters more than the rest: a pair of dry socks sealed inside a plastic bag. Not money, not jewelry, not a phone charger. Socks. Because in Minneapolis, survival can come down to whether the cold reaches your skin before the system reaches you. And Marcus already knows the rule of winter. Once your feet are wet, the night changes. Before we go deeper, tell us where you are watching from. In your city, what becomes shelter when the weather turns dangerous? A bus stop, a library, a car, a church basement, or nowhere at all? Because in Minneapolis, winter changes the meaning of homelessness. A tent in July is not the same as a tent in January. A sidewalk in Los Angeles is not the same as a sidewalk under a Minnesota wind chill. A missed bus is not only inconvenient. A closed library is not only closed. A wet blanket is not only uncomfortable. In winter, small delays can become physical threats. Marcus knows this. He knows which buildings open early. He knows which transit stops have enough glass to block the wind. He knows which coffee shop might let him sit for 20 minutes before asking him to leave. He knows which shelter intake window he has to make before the line gets too long, the bed disappears, or his body gets too tired to keep moving. None of this looks like strategy from the outside. It looks like wandering. But for Marcus, every block has a temperature. Every doorway has a rule. Every hour has a risk. If he waits too long, his socks get wet. If his socks get wet, his feet go numb. If his feet go numb, walking gets harder. If walking gets harder, shelter gets farther away. And if shelter gets farther away, the cold gets more time. This is why the official numbers can never be the whole story. A count can tell you how many people were found on one night. It cannot tell you how many people spent that night choosing between sleep and safety. It cannot tell you who stayed awake to keep moving. It cannot tell you who rode a train because sitting still outside felt dangerous. It cannot tell you who kept checking a plastic bag to make sure one dry pair of socks was still dry. So hold this question as we move forward. What do you think fails first outside in winter? The tent, the body, the shelter system, the clock, or the small thing nobody counts, dry socks, a bus fare, a phone battery, a door that opens in time? Put your answer in the comments. Later in this story, we will come back to it. Because in Minneapolis, what fails first may not be the thing you expect. The numbers in Minneapolis can sound like progress, and to be fair, some of them are. In Hennepin County's 2025 point-in-time count, 2,651 people were counted in shelters and transitional housing programs. Another 427 people were counted as unsheltered. That unsheltered number was down from the year before. County officials said it had fallen 14% from 2024 and more than 33% since 2020. Statewide, Minnesota's 2025 count also showed a decrease. The official count found 8,392 people experiencing homelessness across the state, down 8.8% from the previous year. Those numbers matter. They suggest that housing work, shelter systems, outreach, prevention, and local coordination may be moving some people out of crisis. Hennepin County has also said that since 2020, it and its partners have helped house more than 9,500 people, and that 96% remained out of the homeless response system. That is not nothing. It is real work. It is real staff, real housing placements, real paperwork, real outreach, real people who did not have to spend another winter outside. But numbers have a limit. A count can go down and still leave hundreds of people outside. A trend can improve and still miss the man at the bus stop. A county can house thousands and still have someone like Marcus checking whether his socks are dry before sunrise. That is the hard part of homelessness in a winter city. Progress is not fake. But progress is not warmth. It does not automatically open a door at midnight. It does not make every shelter bed usable. It does not fix every reason someone avoids a crowded room, misses intake, loses medication, or cannot leave a bag behind. It does not turn a frozen bench into a safe place to sleep. So when Minneapolis says the numbers are getting better, that may be true. But Marcus is not sleeping inside a percentage. He is outside, in the cold, with one dry pair of socks, and the morning is still hours away. Marcus wakes before the city looks awake, not because he slept enough, because his feet are cold. At first, he does not move. He listens. A bus sighs at the curb. A truck rolls through slush. Somewhere above him, the city is warming up behind glass lights, furnaces, apartment walls, and coffee machines that click on before sunrise. Marcus opens his eyes and remembers where he is, near a transit stop, close enough to hear the buses, not close enough to be warm. The bench under him is metal. The air feels sharp in his nose. His coat is stiff at the sleeves where melted snow dried and froze again. His blanket is damp at the edge. The first thing he checks is not his phone, not his wallet, not even his bag. It is the plastic bag inside the bag. He pulls it out slowly because the zipper catches. Inside are the socks. One dry pair, folded tight, protected from the snow, the slush, the wet sidewalk, and the kind of accident that can turn a night dangerous before a person understands what happened. To someone indoors, socks are clothing. To Marcus, they are a border between discomfort and danger. He knows what wet socks do. First, they annoy you. Then they chill you. Then they numb you. Then you stop feeling your toes clearly. Then walking hurts. Then walking slows down. Then the next warm place becomes farther away. This is how winter shrinks a city. Not on a map. In the body, a shelter might be 10 blocks away, but 10 blocks with dry feet is not the same as 10 blocks with numb feet. A library might open in 2 hours, but 2 hours under a cold wind is not the same as 2 hours indoors. A bus ride might solve everything if he has the fare, if the bus comes, if he can stay awake, if nobody tells him to move. Marcus presses the plastic bag back into his coat. He has not used the socks yet. That matters, because once the last dry pair is gone, the night becomes a countdown. And Minneapolis is still dark. Now the story becomes math, not budget math, winter math. One dry pair of socks, one bus fare, one shelter intake window, one phone battery, One place that opens early, one place that closes too soon. One body trying to stay warm long enough for the next option to appear. That is the equation Marcus lives inside. If his socks stay dry, he can keep walking. If he can keep walking, he can reach the next warm building. If he reaches the next warm building, he can sit for a while. If he can sit for a while, his body gets time back. But if the socks get wet, the equation changes. Wet socks plus no ride can become numb feet. Numb feet plus 10 blocks can become a missed shelter intake. A missed intake plus falling temperature can become a night spent moving because stopping feels dangerous. And a night spent moving can become exhaustion so deep that even help feels too far away. This is why cold weather homelessness is different. The danger does not always arrive as one dramatic moment. It arrives as a delay, a late bus, a closed bathroom, a shelter line that moves too slowly, a warming space across town, a phone that dies before the address loads, a bag that gets too heavy to carry, a rule that may make sense indoors but breaks down outside. A person can refuse shelter for reasons that look irrational from a living room and feel logical on the street. Maybe he cannot bring his bag. Maybe he is afraid of sleeping near someone who hurt him before. Maybe he missed the intake window. Maybe he has a partner. Maybe he has a dog. Maybe the shelter is full. Maybe he has been moved so many times that every offer now sounds temporary. None of that makes the sidewalk safe, but it explains why the path indoors can be harder than it looks. Marcus does not need a theory. He needs timing. Dry socks before wet snow. A bus before his feet go numb. A door before the cold gets too far into his body. Because in Minneapolis, winter does not wait for the system to line up. It keeps counting down. And to see that countdown, we have to follow Marcus across the city. Follow Marcus across Minneapolis and the city changes shape. It is no longer just downtown Lake Street, Franklin Avenue, light rail stops, underpasses, libraries, shelters, and blocks lined with snow. It becomes a map of temperature. A map of permission. A map of how long one body can stay in one place before someone says, move. Downtown has skyways, warm glass tunnels above the street built so office workers, visitors, and shoppers can cross winter without touching it for too long. For some people, the skyway is convenience. For Marcus, it is a reminder. Warmth exists. It is just not always available to him. Below the skyways, the street has another logic. A bus stop can become a waiting room. A train platform can become a windbreak. A library can become a few hours of safety if it is open, if he can get there if nobody decides he has been sitting too long. A coffee shop can mean heat, but only if he has enough money to become a customer. An underpass can block snow, but not cold. A tent can block wind, but not fear. A shelter can offer a bed, but only if the rules, timing, capacity, safety, and distance all line up at the same time. Marcus knows which routes give him a chance. He knows where the buses run. He knows which blocks feel safer in the dark. He knows which corner has too much police attention. He knows where an encampment used to be before it was cleared. He knows where someone got hurt. He knows which places look empty but are not safe. This is the geography of winter homelessness. Not just where people are, where they are allowed to remain, where they are pushed, where they disappear when the count is over. A person indoors may describe Minneapolis by landmarks. Marcus describes it by survival. Warm, cold, open, closed, safe enough, too exposed, too far, too late. By afternoon, the snow can make everything look clean. By night, the same city becomes a test. And the test is not only whether Marcus can find shelter, it is whether he can keep moving long enough to reach it. That is where the open secret of Minneapolis begins to show itself. By now, the open secret is almost visible. In Minneapolis, cold turns delay into danger. That sentence sounds simple, until you stand where Marcus stands. A tent can be unsafe. A bus stop can be too exposed. A shelter can be too far. A library can be closed. A warming space can open after the worst part of the morning has already passed. All of those are different problems, but winter connects them. Earlier, I asked, what fails first outside in winter? The tent, the body, the shelter system, the clock, or the small thing nobody counts. For Marcus, the answer is not always the body. The body may be the last thing to fail. Before that time fails, the bus comes too late. The intake window closes too early. The coffee shop asks him to leave before the library opens. The phone dies before the address loads. The socks get wet before he reaches a place to change them. And once time fails, everything else begins to fall with it. Walking gets slower. Choices get smaller. Patience gets thinner. Trust gets weaker. The next offer of help becomes harder to believe because the last door did not open when the cold was already inside his coat. This is why winter homelessness is so hard to measure. A count can record a person outside. It cannot record how close that person came to danger before the clipboard arrived. It cannot record how many times he had to move just to stay warm. It cannot record the hour when his feet went numb or the moment when he decided not to sleep because sleep felt unsafe. A city can say the count is lower. That may be true. But winter asks a different question. Who is still outside when the temperature falls? Who has a dry place to sit? Who has a way to get there? Who has a door that opens before the body gives up? That is why the reveal is not that Minneapolis has fewer people counted outside. The reveal is what the cold can still do after the numbers improve. The reveal is not that Minneapolis has made progress. We already know the numbers can show that. The reveal is what progress cannot prove. It cannot prove Marcus slept indoors. It cannot prove his socks stayed dry. It cannot prove the bus came in time. It cannot prove a shelter bed was reachable. It cannot prove a warming space opened before his body started losing heat. That is the distance between a count and a cold night. A count can measure who was found. It cannot measure how long they had already been freezing. A count can show fewer people outside than before. It cannot show how close one person came to danger before sunrise. A count can tell the city something important, but it cannot tell the whole story. Earlier, I asked what fails first outside in winter. The tent, the body, the shelter system, the clock, or the small thing nobody counts. For Marcus, the answer is time. Time fails first. The intake closes. The bus is late. The library is still dark. The phone battery dies. The socks get wet. The body keeps moving because stopping feels more dangerous than exhaustion. That is where the countdown begins. First, the count improves. Then, the city reports progress. Then Marcus still has to survive the night. The count went down, but the cold still had no door. Wet socks, closed doors. No ride. That is the number behind the number. 427 people counted as unsheltered in Hennepin County. But how many were outside before the count? How many were walking because sitting still was too cold? How many were riding transit because the train felt warmer than the street? How many missed a bed because the line was too long? How many refused a bed because the room did not feel safe? How many had a partner, a dog, a bag, a disability, a fear, a trauma, a reason that does not fit neatly into a spreadsheet? Those questions do not erase the progress. They explain why progress can still feel frozen. For Marcus, the difference is not political. It is physical. A lower count does not warm his feet. A better trend does not dry the blanket. A housing placement report does not change the temperature at a bus stop before sunrise. If the city opens a door, the cold loses power. But if the door is too far, too late, too full, too unsafe, or too complicated to reach, then winter becomes the system Marcus actually lives inside. That is why the cold is more than weather in this story. It is the test. It tests every shelter rule, every bus route, every outreach plan, every promise that help exists, every claim that the crisis is getting better. And in Minneapolis, the hardest truth is this: the count can go down. The cold can still win. But to tell the story honestly, we also have to ask why the city does not simply leave every encampment alone. This is where the story needs balance, because the city's argument is not imaginary. Encampments can be dangerous. Not only uncomfortable, dangerous. A tent can catch fire. A crowded camp can become a place where violence hides. Drugs can move through it. Exploitation can move through it. Traffickers can find people who are already isolated, exhausted, and easier to control. Trash can build up. Neighbors can feel trapped between compassion and fear. A parent can avoid a sidewalk. A business owner can lose customers. A resident can look out the window and feel that the city has stopped answering the phone. And people living inside the encampment can be unsafe too. That part is sometimes forgotten. Leaving Marcus outside in a dangerous camp is not compassion. Leaving people in freezing tents and calling it tolerance is not housing. A city can be wrong to sweep people without exits and still be right that encampments are not safe homes. That is the hard middle of this story. Minneapolis does have a responsibility to act. It has a responsibility to public safety, to sanitation, to sidewalks, to neighborhoods, to people living indoors, and to people living outside. But action is not the same as solution. A closure can remove a camp. It cannot automatically create enough safe beds. It cannot heal addiction. It cannot treat trauma. It cannot replace trust. It cannot make a crowded shelter feel safe to someone who has already been hurt. It cannot keep Marcus warm if the only offer comes too late, too far away, or with rules he cannot meet that night. That is why the debate keeps breaking into two incomplete answers. One side says, clear the camp. Another side says, stop the sweep. But the better question is harder. What opens after the camp closes? Where does Marcus go with his bag? Where does he sleep with wet socks? Who follows up tomorrow? Who makes sure the door is still open when the cold returns? Because in Minneapolis, doing nothing can be dangerous. But doing only the visible thing can be dangerous too. So the real question is not whether the city should act. It is what action must include. If the real question is what action must include, then the answer has to start before the coldest night arrives. A winter plan is not real until the coldest person can actually use it. That means emergency shelter that works at the hour people need it. Not only when the office is open, not only when the bus schedule lines up, not only when someone has a phone, an ID, a perfect history, and the ability to stand in line while their feet go numb. It means warming spaces with hours that match the danger. Because the cold does not become dangerous only during business hours. It means transportation. A bed across town is not a bed if Marcus cannot reach it. A warming room that exists on paper is not warmth if the route requires money he does not have, transfers he cannot manage, or a walk his body cannot finish. It means dry clothing, socks, gloves, thermal layers. A place to change, a place to dry what is wet. In a winter city, those are not donations at the edge of the system. They are survival infrastructure. It means storage, because asking someone to choose between a shelter bed and the bag that holds their documents, medication, winter gear, and last dry clothes is not a real offer for everyone. It means low barrier options. Some people need a quiet room. Some need to stay with a partner. Some need a place that can handle addiction, trauma, disability, a dog, a cart, or the fear that comes from being hurt before. It means outreach that does not end when the encampment closes. Who checks on Marcus tomorrow? Who knows where he went? Who helps replace the lost ID, the missed appointment, the soaked blanket, the medication, the phone that died in the cold? And finally, it means housing that is measured by stability, not announcements. How many people moved indoors? How many stayed indoors? How many returned to the street? How many were offered help but could not use the offer? Those questions are not anti-city. They are how a city proves the plan is more than a winter press release. Minneapolis does not need a choice between unsafe camps and frozen sidewalks. It needs a system where public safety and human survival are not treated as opposites. Because if the camp closes but no usable door opens, the city has not ended the crisis. It has only moved it into the cold. If Minneapolis does not build usable exits, the cost does not disappear. It moves. It moves into emergency rooms when cold exposure becomes a medical crisis. It moves into clinics when frostbite infection, exhaustion, addiction, and untreated illness arrive together. It moves into police calls when the same person appears at another bus stop, another doorway, another underpass, another place residents were told would be cleared. It moves into transit stations when trains and platforms become warming rooms because nothing else is open close enough or trusted enough to use. It moves into libraries when staff are asked to become the front line of a crisis they did not create. It moves into shelters when workers have to solve in one night what rent trauma, poverty, addiction, disability, and winter have been building for years. It moves into neighborhoods when people lose patience, not because they hate the homeless, but because the visible problem keeps returning. And it moves into Marcus. Every delay becomes physical. Every closed door becomes colder. Every wet sock makes the next block harder. Every missed bus gives winter more time. Every night outside makes tomorrow's offer of help harder to accept because trust also has a temperature. Doing nothing is expensive, but doing only the visible thing is expensive too. A camp closure without shelter can move danger into hiding. A shelter offer without transportation can become a sentence on paper. A warming space with the wrong hours can become a locked door at the worst moment. A lower count without enough exits can make the crisis look smaller, while the night still feels endless. This is how cities pay for homelessness everywhere except the place that ends it. They pay in ambulances, in police overtime, in emergency beds, in library staff burnout, in neighborhood anger, in outreach teams starting over, and in people like Marcus measuring survival by whether one pair of socks is still dry. The question is not whether Minneapolis can afford to act. It already is acting. The question is whether the action reaches the person before the cold does. Because if it does not, winter becomes the bill. By now, Marcus is no longer only one man in Minneapolis. He is a mirror. Not because every person outside lives his exact story. Not because every winter city fails the same way. But because cold weather America keeps asking the same question in different accents. How do you count progress when the danger is still outside? Marcus keeps the dry socks in a plastic bag because once they are wet, the night changes. In Chicago, another man may ride trains because the platform is warmer than the street. In Milwaukee, a woman may wait for a warming room that opens too late. In Fargo, the wind can turn a missed ride into danger. In Detroit, an abandoned building may feel safer than open air, even when it is not. The cold is coming. That is the mirror. A city can lower its count. A county can house thousands. A state can report improvement. A mayor can promise action. A shelter can add beds. An outreach team can work all night. All of that can be real. And still, the person outside has to survive the hour they are in. Not the year, not the report, not the plan, the hour. That is what winter does. It turns policy into minutes. It turns delay into numbness. It turns transportation into survival. It turns a locked door into a medical risk. It turns socks into infrastructure. For Marcus, Minneapolis is not a headline about progress. It is the walk between warm places, the bench that steals heat, the snow that finds the gap between shoe and pant leg, the plastic bag inside his coat, the decision not to use the last dry pair too early, the fear that if he changes now, he will have nothing left later. And across the country, other people are making versions of that same calculation. In colder cities, in smaller towns, in places where homelessness is less visible because winter pushes people into hiding. The count can miss them. The camera can miss them. The snow can cover the sidewalk. But the body does not miss the cold. And if Minneapolis cannot turn lower numbers into warmer nights, another city will inherit the same lesson. Progress has to reach the person before the weather does. Otherwise, winter writes the ending. So what do we do with what Marcus has shown us? First, stop asking only whether the count went down. Ask what happened to the people still outside. Were winter beds available when the temperature fell? Were warming spaces open when the danger was highest? Was transportation provided? Could people bring their bags? Could they stay with a partner? Could they bring a dog? Could someone with trauma, addiction, disability, or fear actually use the offer being made? And after an encampment closes, ask what happened the next morning. Who followed up? Who found Marcus? Who helped replace what was lost? Who made sure he was not just moved from one cold place to another? That is where communities can act. Support winter shelter that people can actually reach. Support warming spaces with usable hours. Support transportation, storage, outreach, treatment, and housing that lasts longer than a headline. And when a shelter-supportive housing site, treatment program, or warming space is proposed near you, listen carefully for the sentence that decides whether the crisis moves or ends. Not here, Because not here does not make winter disappear. It moves the person to the next bench, the next platform, the next underpass, the next pair of wet socks. 5 winters from 9, Minneapolis will either be the city that turned lower counts into warmer nights, or the city that celebrated progress while people still froze outside. The choice in some small way is also yours. And before we leave, we need to return once more to Marcus. The last time we see Marcus, morning has reached Minneapolis. The city looks cleaner under snow, quieter, almost peaceful. Marcus opens the plastic bag. The socks are still dry. That is good news, but he is still outside. The count can fall. The snow can cover the sidewalk. But if Marcus is still waiting for a door, the crisis has not ended. It has only learned to hide under winter. Next time on No Address, we follow another city where homelessness hides in a different shape. Disclaimer. This documentary is for educational and journalistic purposes only. It discusses homelessness, poverty, mental health, addiction-related issues, housing policy, and public spending. Composite characters are based on patterns from public records, housing research, shelter data, court filings, and published case studies. They are not intended to identify any specific private individual. This video does not promote illegal activity, drug use, harassment, or harmful behavior. Some footage has been edited or blurred for privacy, safety, and compliance with YouTube community guidelines.